Are you getting tired of using the same old win cons in your decks over and over again, ad nauseum? Would you like to completely decimate your opponents with a new win con that you've probably never heard of before, that is a 1-card combo, uncounterable, and guaranteed to make Izzet your new favorite color combination? Well, look no further, because in this deck tech, I am going to show you how to flood the board with huge creatures and kill the table with a flurry of triggered abilities and ETB effects just by casting one good Dragonstorm. Now, when most people cast Dragonstorm, they're only able to get 2 or 3 dragons at the most because they can't cast very many spells in a turn to build up the storm count and still have 9 mana to cast Dragonstorm. So naturally, the first thing you may be wondering is, how do we get our storm count high enough and still have enough mana left to cast Dragonstorm? I'll explain in a minute how to easily get Storm to 6 or 7 and still have plenty of mana to get off the perfect Dragonstorm. But first I want to explain the combo itself and how it works. We begin by assuming that storm count is at least 6 so that we get 7 dragons total from all the copies of Dragonstorm plus the original. The first dragon that we're going to get is Lathless Dragon Queen, and she reads, whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. The second dragon that we're going to cheat into play is Terror of the Peaks. Terror of the Peaks reads, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So, when Terror of the Peaks enters the battlefield, it will trigger Lathless. Lathless will make a 5/5 dragon token. When the token enters the battlefield, the token will trigger Terror of the Peaks, and Terror of the Peaks will do 5 damage to your opponent's face. The third dragon that we're going to get is Scourge of Valkis. Scourge of Valkis reads, whenever Scourge of Valkis or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of dragons you control. You can probably see where this is going. Next you have Scourge of Valkis enter the battlefield, and that's going to trigger both Lathless and Terror of the Peaks. Another 5/5 dragon token enters the battlefield, and when it does, it's going to trigger both Terror of the Peaks and Scourge of Valkis. By the time all 7 of your dragons enter the battlefield and the stack resolves, your opponents should all be dead. Okay, so you get the idea. Lots of dragons entering the battlefield. Scourge of Valkis and Terror of the Peaks makes opponents' life totals go oof, ouch, owie, you win the game, GG, easy. Except it doesn't always go down like that, because sometimes you get an opponent who has an exceptionally high life total and you have to do more stuff. Thankfully for us, we still have 4 more dragons to get after Scourge of Valkis. The next 2 dragons you get don't really matter, just as long as they're dragons. I like to use Goldspan Dragon and Galazeth Prismari, just because they synergize really well with the rest of the deck, but you can use any 2 other dragons you want, it really doesn't matter. The last 2 dragons we're going to get do matter, and they're very important to the combo. The last 2 are Nullspine Dragon and Niv Mizzet Pay Rune. Nullspine Dragon says, when Nullspine Dragon comes into play, you may discard your hand and draw cards equal to the damage dealt to target opponent this turn. And Niv Mizzet Pay Rune says, whenever you draw a card, do 1 damage to any target. So if you have one opponent who's still alive and managed to survive getting blasted by Scourge of Valkis and Terror of the Peaks, when you have your last 2 dragons enter the battlefield, you're going to discard your hand and draw about 30-ish cards with Nullspine Dragon, and then shoot your remaining opponent to death with the Niv Mizzet Pay Rune triggers. So at this point, you may be wondering, wow, Mox cardboard? It must be nice living in Magic Fantasyland where everyone has turn 1 soul rings and god tier opening hands, but how am I supposed to cast 6 spells in a turn and still have 9 mana to cast Dragonstorm? Well, the answer is simple. We're going to be casting a lot of red ritual spells and net positive mana rocks, and Dragonstorm is never actually going to cost 9 mana. It's going to cost 4 or 5 mana because we're running Mizzix of the Ismagnus as our general. Like any respectable Mizzix list, our deck is going to be composed almost entirely of instant sorceries and good mana rocks. Aside from the usual suspects of high quality card advantage spells you'd expect to see in a good Mizzix deck, we're also running some soft combos that help us achieve our ultimate goal of getting storm count to at least 6 and casting Dragonstorm. While usually Chain of Vapor and Snap are good enough spot removal spells on their own, they're especially good in our deck for building Storm, because we can use them to bounce Dockside Extortionist for double the treasure. Speaking of making an obscene amount of treasure tokens, we're also running Hull Breacher and 4 wheel effects. It's important to get as much value out of Hull Breacher as possible before it's inevitably banned by the Rules Committee. Commander Legends was a mistake, and they know it. Another excellent card for building Storm that also just so happens to be great for getting experience for Mizzix, ramping, and drawing cards is Paradoxical Outcome. I cannot emphasize enough how much of an absolute banger this card is. Play all your cheap mana rocks, tap them for mana, bounce them, draw 3 or 4 cards, and then play them all again for free. In a Dragonstorm deck, it does not get much better than this. And since we're already building our deck around resolving a big Storm card, we might as well also be playing Mind's Desire. If we're ever playing out our hand and have a ton of mana and Storm count, but still no Dragonstorm, Mind's Desire is probably the next best card in the deck. If we don't top deck a free Dragonstorm with Mind's Desire, we still may very well cheat out a big draw spell that will draw us into Dragonstorm. Aside from drawing a ton of cards or casting a bunch of spells for free off a huge Mind's Desire, the next best thing you can do in this deck, or any Mizzix deck really, is recur the spells in your graveyard. The best cards for doing this are Past in Flames and Underworld Breach. This may or may not occur to most players, I don't know, but Izzet Spellslinger decks like this one are low-key graveyard decks. I can tell you from many years of experience playing Mizzix that our graveyard is just as, if not more important to us, than a mono-black Reanimator deck's graveyard is to the person playing it. The easiest way to run away with a game is to make full use of your graveyard and replay all those spells. The deck's only real weaknesses are Hushbringer and similar effects. As you may have noticed, almost every dragon in our combo have the words "enters the battlefield" on the card. Besides that, there's only ever been a handful of cards ever printed by Wizards of the Coast that can counter Dragonstorm and all of its copies, but most players don't play those cards anyway, so in 99.99% of our games, our win con is going off without a hitch. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Be sure to join our Discord channel where you can get deck building advice, interact with the makers of the channel directly, and tell us what kind of content you want to see in future videos. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.